Hi, I'm Kat. It's going to take me a minute to, you get up here at first. I don't know about anybody else, but I shake for a minute, so not like a chihuahua, thank God, but, it's not good. It happens, a little shaky. But I just wanted to say first, thank you to Lance for inviting me to be here today, and I've come to gain some friends in this particular group. Another one is Jane, and she couldn't be here tonight, and I'm very, very grateful that they both thought of me to be here and share my story. So thank you for having me. My friend Carrie is here tonight. I'm very grateful to have somebody in my life here with me. So I guess we'll just get started. I'll let you know, first of all, that I am a very grateful member of the Addison Al-Anon family group in North Dallas, Texas. Have been for 13 years, although that's not where my recovery started, and kind of get to that later. I am really incredibly blessed to have a home group that has been an AA and an Al-Anon group for over 38 years now. My first sponsor in this program has 40 years right now. My current sponsor is LNC, and she has 43 years, and my grand sponsor has 62 years. She's 95 years old, and she sponsors at least one meeting a week right now. So I am incredibly grateful and blessed to have the recovery, to have been offered the recovery that I've been offered. The way that I got to know Lance and Jane was in 2020, of course, like everybody else with COVID. We had an online meeting that we created, and that has grown and grown, and now we have people from all over the world in our Addison meetings. So it's really a very cool thing, because we get an opportunity to meet people from far away that we wouldn't know otherwise, right? So that really opens up recovery to a lot of people, and gives us an avenue. I like to go to meetings that are in London or somewhere else, just because you can get a different perspective, different cultures and so forth. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I am a mom, first and foremost. I have 4 amazing kids between the ages of 25 and 34 years old. I'm Nona to Addie and Piper. They're 3 and 5 years old, and absolutely adore them. Am I stepping away from this? Sorry. I'm shying away. No. So I'm a sister to Bob and Jack. I'm a daughter to Helen and John. I'm an aunt. I'm a friend. I'm a sponsor, an Al-Anon sponsor, and an Alateen sponsor. But first and foremost, I am my higher power's daughter, and my higher power is God. And between probably the 2 most important relationships of all the many wonderful relationships in my life are my relationship with God and with myself. And there was a time where I couldn't say that about either one of those relationships. My sponsor has taught me, and the big book says that we talk about how I was, what happened, and how I am today. And it used to be that when I get up and tell my story, I would talk about how it was, what happened, and how it is today. 2 very different things, right? So, and talking about how I was is talking about how I felt. And the way I felt really from the very beginning was that I was always living in self-centered fear. I didn't have a solid foundation underneath me. I was born in Fitchburg, Massachusetts in October of 1965. I have an Irish-Italian Catholic family, so they like to drink, fight, and go to church and ask for forgiveness. It's kind of what they did. The thing that I remember the most about my family when I was young, in terms of the way the family disease of alcoholism was showing up in the extended family, was my dad's father, my grandfather. I think, well, first of all, okay, in his basement, he had a bar that literally he could have had someone come in and give him a certification and open that thing up for business. Because there were booths, there was a fully stocked bar, there were bar stools, there was a piano for open mic night. It was happening. So that was Grandpa Raymond, right? And the interesting thing that I noticed, it's funny, this is the thing that always popped out to me even when I was very little. We'd go to their house on Christmas Eve. And on Christmas Eve, somehow, and through stories over the years, we've kind of pieced it together that Grandpa would point my dad and his 2 brothers at each other. And there'd always be some sort of an altercation, right? So like someone would be pointed towards the thermostat, and now they're fighting over the temperature on the thermostat. And one year it was, they had a pillow fight, and the pillow fight got ugly somehow, right? But Grandpa couldn't drink on holidays the way he wanted to drink. So if he kind of got them all going, then he, of course, what he would do is throw his hands in the air and go, oh, I need to go for a walk. And off he'd go for the walk, and of course he'd end up at the bar down the street where he could drink where he wanted to drink, the way he wanted to drink. So that was kind of my early experience with extended family, just one example of alcoholism. My dad grew up in a family where his dad was the alcoholic and his mom they were a very influential, wealthy family. And so he, I think, got the message at a very young age that reputation was everything, right? And he didn't like any interference. He wanted to be in control. And so, he put off this father knows best kind of persona for the rest of the world about our family, but the rule inside our house was, what happens here stays here. It's our business and no one else's. So family interference in the early years of his marriage did not go over well for him. So in 1968, when my older brother was, I guess I would have been 3 at the time, my older brother would have been 5-ish. He moved us first to Keene, New Hampshire, and then in 1969 to Syracuse, New York. In New York, that's where really things kind of started to fall apart. The first time that I ran away from home, I was 4 years old. When a 4-year-old runs away from home, that's probably an indication that things aren't going so well at home, right? If they feel like the world outside the house is safer than the world inside the house, something's not quite right there. I would run away 4 times between the ages of 4 and 8. And I have to tell you, on that last one, I really thought that I had made, the great escape. I took a friend with me. We were gone for half a day. We made it about 3 miles before the Syracuse Fire Department found us. I mean, I almost got away with it. But it didn't exactly work out. So, but things clearly weren't good in our home. I was waking up at night and just kind of walking the house in terror. And I didn't know why I was so afraid. I just knew I was afraid, and I knew it was a house where I couldn't wake up my parents to tell them that I was scared, because their anger was greater than whatever was making me afraid in the middle of the night. And I wasn't alone in that. This was a situation where my mom adored my brothers, adored them. She was wonderful with them. She was a great mom with them. She, for whatever reason, was very distant with me. She wasn't affectionate. She kind of held me at arm's length. And it just wasn't a close relationship. Years later, after my parents divorced, I asked my dad, well, what was that about? And he said that he said, it's interesting. He said, because when she was pregnant with you, she was as excited to have you as she was to have your brother. She said, and she was very excited, for the first 6 months of your life. She said, and then he said, something changed. And he didn't know what it was, but over the years, he said he asked her several times, what's going on here? And she needs a mother, and I can't be a mother and a father to her. And she could never give him an answer. So from about 6 months old on, he said he'd come home sometimes, after work, and I'd been in my crib all day long. Nothing had changed from the time he'd left that morning until the time he got home that night. So it was a very different relationship between myself and my mom and the relationship that my mom had with my brothers. And that was that way for the duration, of our relationship. But my brothers were equally affected by this, even at a very young age, by whatever was going on in the house. Now, I have to tell you, I think that it's an absolute gift from God. I thank God all the time that I don't remember the majority of what was going on in that house. I'm not sure I'd want to. But my older brother, he started sleepwalking somewhere around 5-6 years old, and he became an escape artist because in the middle of the night he could find his way out of the house, and it did not matter how many locks my dad put on the door. He could find his way out of the house in the middle of the night, sound asleep. So one night my dad gets a call at 3 o'clock in the morning from the neighbor, and she said, get over here right now, meet me in the driveway. So Dad goes over to the driveway, and she's standing there holding a handgun. And he said, what's going on? She goes, look at my garage. And the garage door's open, and Bob's sitting Indian style on the hood of her car, sound asleep. And she said, I thought someone was trying to steal my car. I almost shot him. My little brother, in contrast, he didn't try to run away from home. He wasn't trying to break out of the house, my older brother and I were. But he had an imaginary friend. Now, that's not so unusual, right? People have imaginary friends. Jack's imaginary friend was Mr. Gorilla. Don't screw with Mr. Gorilla. And don't screw with Jack. And I didn't even remember that until he brought that up recently. So that was interesting. So anyway, things weren't going well. I was very accident prone. At one point, I'd sliced my head open, had 87 stitches. By the time I went to kindergarten, I had so many stitches and cuts and bruises on me that they called my parents in to ask what was going on at home. It just clearly was not a good situation. When I was about 7 years old, they decided that they couldn't not address the night terror thing anymore. And so finally they went to a doctor who said, you know, all you can really do is make sure that she stays in bed. So they recommended a harness. So they had a harness for me, which kept me in bed, and that only resulted in me having a bedwetting problem. And whatever the stress was that was going on in that house, my parents' solution to that bedwetting problem was to send me to the neighbor's house for diapers, because if I couldn't stop, then they were going to make sure that they could control it. And they were going to make sure that I knew that it was up to me to control it, right? This was the family disease of alcoholism active within our home. I guess eventually the bedwetting stopped. I don't remember it going on after we moved to Texas. So in 1975, we moved to Texas. I was 9 years old, and I was different from everyone. Now I wasn't just different from the people in my home. You know, they're all brunettes, I'm blonde. My brother's telling me that I'm adopted, and I'm starting to believe it, right? Because, you know, this isn't going so well, and I'm pretty isolated. And part of the reason that I was so isolated, I spent a lot of time in my room growing up, and part of the reason for that was that I was severely ADHD. And so now we're moving to Texas. I've got this New England accent, you know, and I'm living with all these kids in Texas, and I'm going to school with an undersupported ADHD experience and severe undiagnosed dyslexia. And I'm the awkward kid, right? You know, I'm wearing the Coke bottle glasses. I don't look like anybody else. I'm not acting like anybody else because I'm thinking off the walls with hyperactivity. And now I'm not fitting in my family either. So, you know, making friends for me was very difficult. I felt separate and different from, right, everyone else. But you just kind of live the life. You get through it. You keep going. And, you know, my elementary, my middle school experience wasn't great. My high school experience was even worse. And then at 16, I finally decided to start taking my ADHD medicine correctly for various reasons. The big thing is that I was not doing well in school. And about the time that I started doing that, my mom started sending me back to the doctor more often to get the prescription refilled. And I didn't think anything of it. But then the doctor started asking me, well, why are you coming back every 2 weeks instead of once a month? And so, well, I don't know, ask my mom. And she'd say, oh, well, she left the cap off the bottle and they got knocked down the sink. There were various excuses, right? So finally my dad gets a call from the doctor who says, I'm not prescribing this to her anymore. She's taken too much of it. She's got a problem. And he's talking about me. And my dad confronts my mom. And, you know, it's not like he didn't know that not only about her alcoholism, but more so about her prescription drug abuse all these years. He knew about it because what she did was she went from doctor to doctor to doctor. And she'd go to a doctor until they fired her and go to another one and go to another one and go to another one. And eventually she got to a doctor who said, you can't do this anymore. You've got an ulcer and this is dangerous. And so she went and found another doctor until she got to a doctor who said, you not only can't do this anymore, now you have a bleeding ulcer, and this is going to kill you. My memory of my mom and her dependence on, you know, the things that made her bodily different, right, from her fellows, was that there was multiple pill bottles in her purse, on her nightstand in her bedroom, on the table next to the chair in the living room, in the medicine cabinet. She was getting fired from jobs for taking too many prescription drugs at work. It was obvious to everyone. But I think this was a situation for her that the fear of recovery was greater than the fear of the consequences of the life that she was living. And I don't know, I think she was probably under so much stress that she didn't really see, or maybe she did, how it was affecting the people around her, right? So now I'm 16 years old. I'm in high school. High school is not going well. I'm trying to take the Ritalin. I do really well for a semester until suddenly that's gone. And then I come home from school one day, and I forgot my key. Not uncommon. So I go around to the sliding glass door that I know how to pop off the track, and I get into the house, and it's dark, and it's a cloudy day, so it's really dark in the house, but immediately I notice that things are missing. There's furniture missing, there's electronics missing, things are missing. So I call 911, and they're like, well, do you think the person that robbed you is still in the house? And off I go to the neighbor's house. And who do I call? I call my dad, right? Because Dad is the guy to call when things are going wrong. He's the person who's holding it together in our house, right? When Dad's around, which by the way, he was gone 70% of the time traveling for work, but when he is around, there's 3 meals a day. Things are happening the way they're supposed to. There's an expectations about grades in school and that sort of thing. When he's gone, we're digging around in the couch for change so that we can try and buy dinner, right? 2 very different lives between when he's there and when we're just with Mom. Anyway, I call my dad. His assistant answers the phone, and she explains to me, I need to talk to Dad. She says, he's not here. Well, when will he be back? He's out for the day. Oh, okay. Well, how do I reach him? It's an emergency. She said, well, what's the emergency? And I said, well, our house has been robbed, and I've called the police. And she says, oh, honey, that's not what's happened. And suddenly I start piecing it together. The previous Sunday night, them being behind their closed bedroom door, her crying, the rest of the week, her falling to sleep, crying herself to sleep on the couch in the living room. And I call my mom, and she works at a Target, but it wasn't a Target. And I call my mom, and she answers the phone, and I said, he left, didn't he? And she said, what are you talking about? She said, Kathy? And I said, yeah. And I said, he left, didn't he? And she said, what's going on? And I said, well, I called the police. I thought the house had been robbed. Dad left, didn't he? And she said, oh my God, I can't believe he actually did it. She was just sure that he would stay and she wouldn't need to go into recovery. And now the bottom of her life has fallen out, and she's not even seeing the bottom of everybody else's life that's fallen out. I go back over to the house. My mom does not come home. She sends my 18-year-old brother home to handle things. The police are there. They're showing me the note that was tacked up by the front door that says, everything's okay. I'll be back to explain later. Love, Dad. I go back into their bedroom with the other police officers who are having me confirm that, yes, it's his dresser that's missing. Yes, it's his closet that's empty. And where am I in all of this? I'm living in self-centered fear because a few weeks before, the neighbor, because my parents, there was no guidance, there was no support, there was nothing going on in terms of taking care of the kids, especially me. So the neighbor, a few weeks earlier, I had been having, not to be too graphic here, but, puberty hits, things happen with girls, things weren't happening regularly, right? So the neighbor takes me to Planned Parenthood, and the doctor at Planned Parenthood says, we need to regulate this, so we're going to put you on birth control pills. So I'm sitting in my parents' bedroom talking to the police officers thinking, oh my God, I wonder if my dad on the birth control pills hidden under the carpet in my bedroom closet. Self-centered fear, it's all about me, right? And this is the way my life is going at 16 years old. It's 2 weeks before my 16th birthday. Well, of course, that wasn't why he left. Obviously it went downhill from there. I have lived this very sheltered life to this point. I know nothing about the outside world. I know nothing about the real world. I mean, even when it comes to just regular everyday experiences. My parents and my brothers, they went to the movies. They went to the restaurants. I stayed home. That was my experience to that point. So now here we are, and it's a couple of weeks later, and I've just turned 17, and the only thing I like about school is speech and drama, and I'm working on the school musical, and I'm supposed to be home at 7:30 one night. And I walk in the door at 8 o'clock, and I don't know that it would have made any difference what I said or how nicely I said it. But my mom is not happy with whatever has come out of my mouth, because her first question was, where have you been? And my answer could have been any number of things, and it wouldn't have changed the fact that she came at me. That was the tipping point for her. I was the straw that broke the camel's back. So I take off running. So I'm running down the hall, and then I run down the other hall. She's hot on my heels, so I run through her bedroom. I run over the bed to put the bed between us. She comes over the bed after me. I take off back out into the living room, down the hall, down the other hall, back into the living room, and I am so close to that sliding glass door. I am almost gone. And she makes this epic NFL dive, right? Grabs me up by the head of my hair, and before I know it, she's slamming my head into the wall. Now, mind you, it was a paneled wall, and if anyone remembers paneling, it had a little bit of give, so it's not like she was slamming my head into a brick wall or anything. But at the same time, it was like, holy shit, what's going on here, right? And the thing I remember the most about this, believe it or not, is that my older brother is standing about 3 feet behind her, and he's got a bowl of cereal in his hand, and he's about halfway to his mouth with a spoon of cereal, and he's looking at her like this. Like, what's going on? And I'm looking at him like, a little help here, please, because this is not going well. And it seemed like it took forever for him to get her off of me. It probably took a solid 3 seconds, right? But in that 3 seconds, a decision was made for me. I made the decision in that moment that I couldn't live like this anymore, that I couldn't stay with her and live in this anymore. So I went to some friends' parents and said, can I live with you? And they said, sorry, you'd have to work full time and pay rent, trying to encourage me to stay home, I'm sure. But then a couple of days later, the school counselor calls me in, and he says, you're in your senior year, and you've got to stay in school for another 18 months and pass 18 months beyond your senior year and pass every single class to get a high school diploma. And I said, I'm 17, I can drop out without my parents' approval. And he said, yes. And so that's what I did. And what's the first thing I did? I ran across the street, picked up the phone at the 7-Eleven, called my dad, and what did my dad say? Well, that's disappointing. And that was it. So I went and I moved in with this family, and I went to work full time. And then I met my first boyfriend, and my first boyfriend was a drug dealer. He was 21 years old. He, had a big, highfalutin job. He was a salesman at Radio Shack, and, he wore a shirt and a tie every day, and he had to be respectable, right? And I'm looking for love in all the wrong places, because all I want to do is belong. All I want to do is not be afraid anymore. But he's dealing drugs out of his apartment to the 13 to 17-year-old crowd. And through him, I meet my new best friend, Annette, and I'm not here to tell Annette's story or to take her inventory, but I'll tell you a little bit about that relationship because it's relevant. The short version of this is that I am couch surfing, and now I'm renting space on her couch. I actually am renting from her, so as far as I'm concerned, I have a stable home for a change. I'm not on somebody's couch for a couple of weeks, and then somebody else is. It's about 11 o'clock at night, and they're fighting on the phone, and I'm trying to sleep. Next thing I know, he's at the front door, they're fighting through the front door, and she's saying things to him like, just do the world a favor and kill yourself. This is not going well, and it's clear to me that I'm getting pretty uncomfortable, right? And next thing I know, this 5'4", 130-pound soaking wet guy, who's solid as rock, by the way, breaks down the front door. And he doesn't just bust open the front door, he breaks this solid wood door flat, flat into the floor. I talk with my hands, I'm Italian, what can I say? But this door goes flat onto the floor, right, in front of me. And I watch him pick it up and throw it back into the frame. So it doesn't tell me how strong he is, it tells me how pissed he is. And so I go for the front door to try to get out of it while he's going for her, and he comes back and gets me and throws me on the couch and says, I'll be back for you. And he goes back into the bedroom, and they're fighting and screaming for a grand total of maybe 30 seconds. And the next thing I know, it's quiet, and all I hear is slapping. And so I peek my head around the corner, look into the bedroom, and I see that she's on her knees, bent over backwards. He's got his hands around her throat, and she's slapping his face, trying to get him off of her. And all I can think is, I can't die tonight. I've lived this long, I can't die tonight. And so I run for the sliding glass door, and I can't get the stick out behind the sliding glass door, and I'm sure I made enough noise to where they heard me. But I'm not paying attention to them. I'm paying attention to getting the hell out of there, and we're on the second floor. And I open up the sliding glass door and I jump off the second-story balcony and I land on my feet, which, on the surface sounds okay. But I felt the impact. I felt it from my head all the way into the bottoms of my heels. But I got up, I kind of went down on my knees, and then I got up and I ran for the darkest building I could find. I knocked on every door until, God bless them, this poor couple, I think they were consummating their relationship for the first time. But, they called the police. The police came, they took me to the hospital. I had fractured the right side of my jaw, and I'd herniated two discs in my neck. So I'm wearing a neck brace for the next couple of weeks, but I'm still going to my job every day as a bank teller at the bank. I happen to work in the same building that Annette works in, and I haven't talked to her in this time, and she just marches in there like she owns the place one afternoon, walks up to my teller window and says, my mom has cancer, she's dying, I have to go to Georgia and I can't make the drive alone. And what do? I get in the car and I go with her, because that's the place that I'm living from. I'm living from this place of just needing anybody, right? And here's somebody that I knew who I thought cared for me. So let's just forget about the fact that, her boyfriend tried to kill us both one night, and just move on. So we spend 18 hours, we get to Georgia, we're almost to her house in this little backwoods town in Georgia. Like population, maybe 800 people. And there's 7 or 8 brothers and sisters. The house is about 800 square feet. It's 4 rooms. They don't have a phone, and she doesn't go to the house. She stops at the convenience store and says, there's something you need to know. And that is that several years prior, her younger brother accidentally, in the middle of a fight with the older brother who was constantly abusing him, shot and killed her older brother, and he had died in her arms. This was what we were walking into, and this is what she was telling me. We get in there, and sure enough, it doesn't take maybe an hour before a fight breaks out. And she leaves me there while she takes the hike a quarter of a mile up the hill to the neighbor's house to call the police. And I am just riddled with anxiety, riddled with fear. I want to be anywhere but where I am, and I can't get out of it. I don't know how. And she's certainly not going to take me out of it. So, okay, just white knuckle your way through it, because that's what I do. It's not hell and I'm not hot. Right? The Al-Anon creed. But a few days later, in the middle of the night, I get up to go to the bathroom, and here comes the younger brother, and I say no, and he does anyway. And I'm afraid to make a fuss, because I don't want to be the reason that someone else in this house dies. So we come home to Dallas. A few months later, I find out that I'm pregnant. And I'm not here to give you my inventory, my 4th step today, but I will tell you that decisions were made. The things that happened did not go well. I ended up at Parkland Hospital 12 hours later, hemorrhaging. And a couple of weeks later, after having laid on my mom's couch for a couple of weeks, just in complete remorse about what I had done, I found myself sitting on the edge of my bathtub with a razor blade in my hand. And the thing that saved me was that self-centered fear. Because I sat there and I thought, if I do this, if I slit my wrists right now, I wasn't worried about anybody finding me. That didn't even enter my mind. What entered my mind was not being in pain anymore. And what I thought was, if I do this and it doesn't work, how much pain am I going to be in then? And I couldn't do it. So big things kept happening. 6 weeks later, my best friend growing up died. And we didn't know if it was suicide or not. He'd had a fight with his girlfriend. He was high. He was hitchhiking home. He was walking onto the on-ramp of the highway when he got hit by several cars, and that was the end of that. Fast forward a few months, and now here's the guy who really does love me, and I'm back in the same situation I was in with a different cause about 4 months later. And this time I get an infection. And I'm laying there in my mom's house, and it's day 4 of 104 fever, and I thought, don't call anyone. Just let it end right here. Because then I don't have to worry about if it works or not. It'll just be over. So I'm not making good decisions. I've been set out into my adult life with this whole toolbox full of tools that aren't serving me well. I don't know how to be in relationship with others. I don't have any principles that I can live by, right? All I have to live by is what I've been given. And the biggest tool that I've been given is that the truth is not your friend, right? Dishonesty was the thing that I lived by. Because if I told you something and you weren't happy with me, then I wasn't okay, because I was suddenly terrified that I was going to lose you. So I'd lie to you as soon as I looked at you, rather than tell you the truth, if I was afraid that the truth was going to somehow separate us. In the process of all this, my mom was involved. My mom was talking to the boyfriend the second time, and they were telling me things like, if you have this baby, you're going to be homeless. And they're telling me this independent of each other. I'm not going to have anything to do with you. You won't have any place to live. You won't have any money. So what do? Like the good Catholic girl I am, I go and talk to the priest. That helped. So there's all these things going on in my life that are guiding me towards making these decisions. But the people that are guiding me towards these decisions aren't healthy people either, right? Broken people make broken people. I heard that in a meeting at one point, and at first I thought, well, I don't know, that's kind of jaded, isn't it? But no, broken people do make broken people, because they're working from the only place they have to work from. They're doing the best they can with what they have, with what they have to work with. The gift that I had was that I always sought joy, and I was determined that I was going to have a happy life. And so fast forward a few years, and I'm dating someone. I'm 22 years old, and it's Valentine's Day, and the boyfriend's 3 hours late from getting home for our Valentine's date. He walks into the door of his parents' house. I'm like, where have you been? He's not talking to me. He goes and locks himself in the bathroom. 30 minutes later, I pick the lock on the door. I open up the door. I see him with a needle in his arm. I see the lighter and the spoon on the floor. It's 1987. We're at the height of AIDS at that point. And back then, if you got HIV, you got AIDS, and you were dead, and it all happened very quickly, right? So immediately, the next day, I go to the doctor. I get an HIV test, and I wait 2 weeks for the results, because that's how long you had to wait back then. And they call me with the results, and they say, and I'm just waiting for the relief to set in, right? Oh, okay, I dodged a bullet here. And they say, well, your test results are inconclusive. And I said, well, what does that mean exactly? And they said, well, we can't say that you have it, but we can't say that you don't. And instantly, my life changed. I thought, there's no future relationship here. Nothing good is going to come of this, right? And the nurse in that doctor's office said Al-Anon to me. So I went to an Al-Anon meeting. And I walk in the room, and it's this little bitty room with this, what seemed like a giant table, and 12 women who are at least 137 years old each. And they all terrified me. And I can't tell you that I walked away from there with one prevalent thought other than, I'm never doing that again. But I walked away with a one day at a time blue daily reader. And that daily reader, just reading the readings in it, showed me that my inclination was right. That the tools that I had to live my life by, they didn't fit. They weren't true to who I was. But I didn't know who I was, and I didn't know how to learn how to do anything different. And what I've learned in Al-Anon is that through recovery is that I can't replace a bad behavior until I have a good behavior. I can't stop a bad behavior until I have a good behavior or tool to replace it with. Got through that. Now I've got this daily reader that's kind of giving me a little bit of hope. I meet my now ex-husband. We both are from similar backgrounds, so eventually we get married. I think I was 24 years old. We start having kids, 4 beautiful kids. We had 4 amazing kids over the 14 years that we were married. But I get married when I'm 24, and when I'm 28, I start going to counseling. And the counselor is saying things like, have you considered the fact that maybe there's the family disease of alcoholism going on in your home? And I'm like, no, they don't drink any more than anybody else. Well, then we start talking about my mom. And, but no one's dialing in on Al-Anon for me, right? But I'm seeking help, which is good. That's a good place to be. But what I learned out of that more than anything else was something that was reinforced for me later on by my sponsor. My sponsor was once sponsored by Marcy White. And Marcy White had something that she called she talked about something that she called the blessing. And I'm going to read to you what the blessing is. If you don't feel like your parents loved you, no matter what you did, you are not a blessed child. If they didn't give you the blessing, it was because they never got the blessing themselves. Then you go out into the world, an emotional cripple, always looking for someone who would give you the blessing. Inevitably, you connect with people, with someone or others, who's looking for the blessing too. And then we give the blessing to each other, or try to. But what they told me was I was in a rescue marriage. We were both damaged people who didn't have tools or principles to live our life by, trying to have a better life together. And that didn't go well, because for him, he could get to a certain place and then the stress would have him cross a line. And when he crossed that line, it usually just spilled over onto me. But eventually it started spilling over onto the kids. Our youngest was born when I was 33 years old. When I was 35, my mother, at my age, 58, died of her disease. She'd been sick for about a year. She'd been in and out of the hospital, more in than out for that last year. And for someone who worked 7 days a week, 60 hours a week, to see her deteriorate so quickly was kind of shocking to all of us. And in the end, we had to make the decision to continue life support or not. She was in a lot of pain, and she was dying in the exact way that she didn't want to die. And how was I showing up in that? In self-centered fear. I spent 3 days where she should have been comatose, and yet she was awake in the ICU, telling her that I loved her and I was sorry, because I hadn't spoken with her for the few weeks before that. Because through therapy, I was starting to learn some things, and I was starting to get angry with her. And now, we were at a point where there was no way to make that right. There was no way to come to any kind of peace with her. So did I bring her her favorite squishy pillow or her favorite blanket or the pictures of her grandkids? No, I didn't do any of that. I just said, please forgive me. Now, as hard as that was to walk through, the thing that I learned later on was that where I didn't get it right with her, that I've grown enough now to where if I go through that with somebody else again, I will get it right next time around. And I have been through that with somebody else since then, and I did get it right the next time around. But that's hard to do when you don't have the blessing to begin with. So we'll talk a little bit about what happened. When I was 38 years old, my husband and I divorced, because I'm watching all this stuff spill over onto the kids, and it's not good for any of us. So we divorced, and about a year later, I did the one really great thing that I think I did for my kids as a parent. I bought a house, and I made a home for them. And we were in that house for several years, from 2006 to 2010, when I was facing my 5th layoff in 10 years. And he wasn't really a part of supporting the kids other than an enforced child support, but he wasn't a part of their daily lives. And I had an opportunity to either move to Massachusetts or Seattle for my job. And so I chose Seattle. And part of the reason I chose Seattle was because the guy that I had met online lived in Seattle. Well, he didn't live in Seattle. He lived in Central Washington, so I didn't exactly move there for him. I moved there for the job. Let's just say that and call it true. Anyway, I get to Seattle, and that relationship was, one more time I found myself in a place where I was drawn towards these relationships that involved the disease of alcoholism. His ex-wife, was a alcoholic. She was suicidal most of the time. She kept, she was constantly inserting herself into his life. And it was a difficult situation. And about a year in, something had happened, and I said, okay, wait a minute. I kind of need to know where I stand here, because she's showing up and certain things are happening, and I'm not feeling good about this. And he got very emotional, and he said, well, she's the love of my life. I'm in love with her. I never divorced her because I wanted to. It was only to keep my kids from my first marriage so that I wouldn't lose them. And you're just going to have to deal with that. And that didn't sit well with me. As badly as I wanted this, it did not sit well with me. So But I tried. I hung in there for another 6 weeks, and then Valentine's Day rolls around. Valentine's Day wasn't a great day in my life. You're about to understand that here in a minute. But he decides that he wants to take me on a trip for Valentine's Day, and he shows up and takes me off, has the kids pack my bag, takes me off to the airport, and find out we're going to Vegas. So we go to Vegas, and we get there, and he's really distant most of the time, and Valentine's Day rolls around, and we do a couple of special things. And for the first time, I decide to open my mouth and be vulnerable and honest. Not an easy thing for me. There weren't many times I'd done this in my life to this point. And I said, I'm madly in love with you, I'm all in. And he kissed me on the forehead, rolled over, and went to sleep. And I lost my mind. Silently. He didn't know it. I just tossed and turned for a few hours, got up, went and cleaned the bathroom, sat on the bathroom sink, did my makeup, 4 o'clock in the morning, packed my bag. And then his radar went off in his sleep. And all I'm thinking to myself is just put your shoes on, go down to the lobby, walk it off. And he gets up and he looks at me and he goes, what's wrong? And I said, nothing. And he said, what are you doing? And the words in my head that were going to come out of my mouth were, I'm just going to go down to the lobby and go for a walk. And the words that actually came out of my mouth were, I think I need to go home. And that triggered him, and it turned out his aloofness and all of this, once again, was all about her. And the way that ended was that he packed a bag and left me there in Vegas. And it was one of the hardest days of my life in a couple of respects. The main one was that I was behaving in a way that didn't fit. Like, I'm losing my mind and running after him in the elevator and going down to the lobby to try to talk to him and sitting in the stairwell crying. But on the inside, I'm going, what are you doing? This does not fit. And I didn't like it. I didn't like how I felt about myself. But I felt suddenly desperate to be separated from him. And came back, talking to a friend of mine who I'd stayed in touch with from Dallas. On a regular basis. She happened to be a psychologist, lucky me. And she said, maybe the third conversation, every time you say his name, I'm going to say Alanon, Alanon, Alanon. And finally I said, what the hell do you want me to do with that? And she said, go to a meeting, go find a meeting. So I go to a meeting, and the first meeting that I go to, let me just paint the picture for you here, okay? So it's a cloudy Seattle day. It's raining, it's at mid-afternoon. I walk into this room, the shades are about 3/4 of the way down. There's not a light on in the room. There's this big table and about 6 people there, and there's this stack of blue books in the middle. And everyone goes around and introduces themselves, and they get to me, and I'm just bawling my eyes out. I'm new, and I'm Kat. And they said, here. And they hand me a blueprint for progress, and they said, that'll be $12, please. And I went, what? So the next day she calls me, and she's all excited. How did it go? And I'm like, it was terrible. It was awful. I'm never doing that again. She's like, okay. And then I said his name, and she said, Al-Anon. And I went, shit. So off I went, and by the time I got to the 4th meeting, which was a noon meeting in Seattle, I walked in the door, and within the first 5 minutes, I sat all the way down in the chair, and I stayed. Because I heard people telling my story and talking about how I felt. And I hated it. But it was like magnetic. I couldn't step away from it. So my friend who forced me to go to an Al-Anon meeting, she was my first volunteer sponsor. My next volunteer sponsor was the girl at the other end of the room in that meeting. Her name was Kay. She was 6 foot tall, red hair, very Irish, mean mugging me through every meeting. And then at the end of the meeting, she'd get up, she'd walk over to me, and, hi, I'm Kay. And eventually, she talked me out of my phone number. So now she's my stalker sponsor because she's texting me every day, want to have coffee? Want to have coffee? Want to have coffee? So eventually, I put on my best face and my best clothes because that's what I've done for the first 45 years of my life. Why stop now? And I show up and I go to coffee and I hear her talking about her own situation, her own problems, her own recovery. She's sharing with me. She's giving me my first experience of sharing her experience, strength, and hope with me. And she waited me out. You know, at this point, I'm in so much grief over this relationship that I've lost, and I'm trying not to let my kids see it because I still got three of the 4 kids at home with me. And they know what's going on, and they're as heartbroken by this relationship ending as I was because they were close to him, and I was close to his kids, and so forth and so on. And now I'm not talking to them. I'm hiding out from them. And I didn't know this until literally this year when my daughter said, we didn't know if we had done something wrong, but you weren't talking to us. And one more thing to make amends for. But anyway, I've lost my train of thought. Oh, Kay, yeah. So she's waiting me out because I'm involuntarily crying many times a day, right? I mean, my throat is cramping because I am trying so hard not to cry when the crying starts, and it's making me so angry that I can't stop it. And finally, one day, he sends me a box of my stuff. And in it, there's what I thought were some things that he would never, ever part with because they were mine, and he loved me, right? And so I pick up the phone and I call Kay, and she goes, well, damn. I said, what? And she goes, I knew you were going to call me. I knew this phone call was coming. She goes, but I can't talk to you right now. Can I call you back in 10 minutes? Go park somewhere. I'll call you in 10 minutes. So she calls me, and I vomit all the stuff on her for about 15 minutes. And she pauses for a minute after that, and she says, she goes, you know, sweetie, you're trying to do all these things that aren't your job. She said, your only job is every time his name comes into your head is to say, God, please heal my heart. Anything else is none of your business. And that was so foreign to me, but I was so desperate that I would do anything to not feel the way I felt anymore. Eventually, I ended up moving back to Dallas. Interestingly enough, I didn't want to go because I had built these relationships in Seattle, especially with some people that I worked with that were very special to me and are still very special to me today. And I didn't want to leave those relationships, and I didn't want to leave the environment, and I didn't want to leave what I'd built for my kids here. But my oldest son wanted to go back to finish his senior year in high school with his friends. And my house in Dallas, I still had my house. I had to come back for my, you know, to be able to keep or short sale my house. My dad wasn't doing well. God was just saying, go back. And I had my heels dug in. I didn't want to do it. But then my job was going away. So, all right, fine. Let's pack up the 26-foot Penske yet again and drive all the way across the country and move back into the house we just moved out of a year and a half ago, right? And we did that. And I had to meeting shop again, and I had a temporary sponsor in Seattle until I had a temporary sponsor in Dallas, and I started going to meetings. And one day in the meeting, at the end of the meeting, I was just frustrated because I couldn't get connected. My Seattle temporary sponsor said, read the step 3 prayer, read the step 7 prayer, sit down and write a note to God every morning, read the first 164 pages of the big book, right? So I'm doing all these things and I'm not feeling connected. Everyone's talking about conscious connection, and I'm like, what does that mean? And so I say to her at the end of this meeting, I can't get connected. And she goes, well, honey, that's because you don't get connected this way. You get connected this way. And I thought, okay, I don't know what that means, but I'll try it. And then, but the fact of the matter was, if I could just keep walking into the room, all the way into the room, sitting all the way down in the chair, and paying attention, and talking to people after meetings, I was going to learn. Eventually, it was going to penetrate this fortress that I had around me. Because here's the thing. When I finally did get a sponsor, who happened to be someone who sat 4 pews behind me in church for like 20 years, go figure, right? God doesn't have a plan, does he? Yeah, maybe he does. But, you know, Ani shows up, and we start working the steps, and the first few things that she teaches me is that the first word in the first step is we. It's a we program, not an I program. I'm not meant to do anything alone. Well, between that and step 1, I'm pretty pissed off, right? I am highly offended by step 1. I have been self-supporting and self-sufficient my entire life. No one has kept me safe but me, from my perspective, right? So don't tell me I'm powerless. That's just not the facts. Because powerless to me then meant weak and broken and kind of the dirt under God's shoe, right? Under anybody's shoe. I wasn't good enough. And then the other thing that she taught me was that my brain was a bad neighborhood, and I was not allowed to go there alone. That if I was having a disturbed moment or a feeling, even a really big good feeling, I needed to be on the phone with her talking to her about it. And then the other big thing that came up was I'm railing about my ex-husband one day, something to do with the kids. And at the end of my rail, I said, but it's okay. And she looked at me and said, that is not acceptance. Acceptance is accepting a situation for what it is and accepting your feelings that you have about that situation at the same time. She said, you don't get over feelings, you don't go around them. You have to go through them to get to the other side. Well, it'd be a long time before I really heard that, right? You hear what you hear when you hear it. There's a whole lot of recovery here that I haven't talked about yet, and I'm going to do the best I can to get through this as quickly as possible. So I'm about 6 years in with Ani. I've worked my steps. I get to step 4. It takes me a year and a half before I call her one day and said, I think I'm finally ready to do my step 5. And she said, where are you? I said, I'm downtown. She said, where are you going? I said, to work from home the rest of the day. She said, no, you're not. And so I end up in her living room, and for 2.5 hours I'm telling her all the things I thought I'd never tell anyone. And she looked at me and just cried and loved me all the way through it, just like she'd done for the few years before that. That has been the biggest gift of sponsorship in my life, is that I have had not only these sponsors who have such incredibly big spiritual lives and rich recovery of their own, but they have gently and softly loved me until I could love myself. That could never have happened on my own. I couldn't even get willing on my own until I was so desperate and in so much pain that I was so far down on my knees that the only way back up was with the hand of God. And that was God putting people in my life to show me the path. The spiritual path that, by the way, was none of my business, so I was told by one of my sponsors. That, God was going to guide me, and I just needed to pay attention. And eventually I learned, be the paintbrush. You're not the painter. You're just the paintbrush, right? Just show up and do the thing that's in front of you, and God's going to guide you. And when I do that, when I hit complete surrender, that's what happens. In 2017, my youngest child graduated from high school and then promptly decided that she wanted to be a military police officer in the Army, like her second oldest brother. And for the first time in 28 years, I'm not only without the biggest job in my life, being their mom, which, by the way, I always felt so unworthy of that word, of being their mom. I didn't think I deserved to be anybody's mom because of my actions prior to having them. And I knew that I had 2 jobs as their mom. And one was to make sure that they knew how deeply and dearly they were loved every day of their lives. And the other was to do what wasn't done for me, which was get them to 18 without screwing them up. And I didn't quite do that with my oldest. And I, through the program, have learned how to make a living amends. And he's a guy that I have such an amazing relationship with today and for the last several years, that has grown over those last several years, that in January, when he was in such a dark place that he was considering ending his life, the only person he called was me. And that's such a God thing. That's God at work in our lives. When I hit my 6th year in Alanon, I had that one thing on my original step 4 that just kept coming back up. It was the thing I was going to my grave with, right? But my sponsor had said to me in the beginning, I only have a couple of things. One is be in certain meetings with me, and the other is, if you're going to do any part of your recovery work, especially a step 4 and step 5 with someone else, then we probably don't need to be sponsor and sponsee, because I feel like I need to be all in, and I want sponsees that are all in. And that made sense to me. But now I had this thing that I couldn't tell her, because now I loved her, right? She wasn't just my friend. She was someone that I loved. And so anyway, the decision was made, and I ended up going to my grand sponsor. My grand sponsor offered to sponsor me. And so that's how Ellen and I ended up working together. And Ashley moves out in 2017, and suddenly I'm having middle-of-the-night panic attacks, 2 hours long, thinking I'm going to die, feeling in those moments like I was literally the only person on the planet. There was no one I could call. There was no help to reach out to. This was it. And so I sought outside help. And my sponsor at the time had started a 12-step study with several other of her sponsees. And so we were all working the steps together. And the interesting thing here, what was correlating, was that the outside help and my sponsor were independent of each other, saying the same thing, which was, until you can take an honest look at the first 20 years, a rigorously honest look, this middle-of-the-night stuff's going to keep going on because you're living in the terror of it. And what I looked at was, the thing that came up was the memories started to come together for me, one in particular. And I thought they were 3 separate memories. It all happened on one day, and it was at a day when I was not quite 5 years old, and myself and my little brother were at home alone with my mom. And one minute, my little brother's screaming at the top of his lungs, and I walk into the kitchen, and my mother's face down on the floor in a pool of her own blood. And my 18-month-old brother is sitting there next to her, and he's pounding on her back, looking up at me, just screaming blue bloody murder. The next thing I remember is being at the neighbor's house across the street, and it's the first time that I can tell you that I honestly remember having a feeling and being able to identify it. And you would think that that feeling would be fear, right? But I wasn't afraid. I was so angry that no one would answer that door that I pounded on that glass door so hard that I cut my hand open. I cut the palm of my hand open. Next thing I remember is being at the neighbor's house next door, and I'm pounding on that door too, but now I'm pounding on it with the side of my fist. And I pounded on that door so hard that I broke the glass and I sliced my wrist open. I don't remember anything else about that day, but what I can tell you is, without any HIPAA laws, the surgeons at the hospital called my dad, who was on a trip out of town, told his employer exactly what was going on. Her stomach had ruptured. She's dying. She's in emergency surgery. He comes back, sends all of us kids off to Fitchburg, where bad things happen to little kids and shouldn't have. And in the meantime, he's sitting by her bed when she wakes up in the ICU, and what he says to her is, if you ever embarrass me like this again, you'll never see those kids again. I couldn't look at that. I couldn't accept that without recovery. I couldn't spend 15 years from the time my mom died until several years into recovery to not be angry with her anymore and to see her separately from her disease. I would hear people say, the disease is separate from the person, and I'd be like, the hell it is. She had a choice, and she chose to take every pill she took, sometimes in excess of 130 pills a day, come to find out. And what I got to see was the gift of it between step 4 and 5 and steps 8 and 9 was that I not only got to see her humanity, that here she was, just like everybody else, a spiritual being having a human experience, right? But I got to have some compassion for her. My mom was an amazing woman. She was 5 foot tall, and she'd walk into a room and you'd think she was 6'10", and she brought pure joy with her. She was creative. She wrote children's books. She loved everybody, especially the underdogs. She'd do anything to help anyone. But she couldn't help herself, and she couldn't help her daughter. Anyway, seeing her separate from her disease, that was huge for me, because what I was taught then was to pray my steps. And I did pray my steps. Every day I pray my steps now. God, today I'm powerless over jobs and money and COVID and whatever else, right? And I want to be restored to not only sanity, I want to be restored to being kind and gentle with myself and everyone else in my life, so that I can walk out into the world as a whole human being. You know, step 3, the step 3 prayer. I offer myself to thee, to do with me and build with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of my bondage of self, my ego, my self-centeredness, my self-reliance, however I'm showing up today in ways that I don't want to show up. And then I add in the set-aside prayer, take away my difficulties and what I think I know about you and this and this and this and this for a new experience with you and all of it, so that I can have peace today, not victory over it, but peace with it. And show me how I can be of service and what my part is and how it affects me with you and with my sponsor. And I'm entirely ready for you to have my defects of character, but give me the willingness to be completely vulnerable, deeply seen, and rigorously honest. Because I don't want to show up any other way. But I can't show up like that if I don't accept the first and most important thing that I think is my biggest character defect. And that's that I've got this idea in my mind that God makes crap, and he doesn't. Because I'm deeply loved, I'm perfectly made, and I'm always worthy. And then step 7, and then living in 10 at the end of the day with 3 gratitudes and an evidence of God to my sponsor, and living in the meditation and the prayer that I start every day with, and going out into the world and being of service. I sponsor Alanon meetings at the adolescent wing of the mental hospital in Dallas. And I can't tell you of a richer experience in my life of being able to offer hope to someone at an age where there wasn't any hope for me, right? So, I have talked for way too long. I'm going to end with this. If I could talk to 5-year-old me, to 17-year-old me, and most importantly, to 45-year-old Kat, when she walked in the door of that meeting, what I would say to them each is, at 5, you're precious. And don't let anyone tell you anything different. At 17, you're so brave. And you're going to be okay. You are worthy of love. And at 45, I'd say, I'm so proud of you for the courage that it took for you to walk this walk and finally get through this door and be where you are today. And just hang on, baby, because you are going to have a life beyond your wildest dreams. I would hear people say that in meetings and go, I don't know, a life beyond your wildest dreams? Are you sure? And what I know today is that life that I had in my head, you know, the lifestyles of the rich and famous that I thought was the life beyond your wildest dreams, that's not the life beyond my wildest dreams. The life beyond my wildest dreams is the life that I have with the relationships that I have in my life today. They're precious, they're priceless. Most importantly, the relationship that I have with my mom today. I can't wait to see her again. I can't wait to tell her how much I love her, how much I know that she loved me in the best way that she possibly could. If my mom were here today, my mom would thank you. She'd thank you from the bottom of her heart for giving me the recovery that she never got. Not that she didn't have an opportunity to have it, but that she didn't have maybe the courage or the willingness or the ability to have. But you gave it to me, and I will forever be grateful. Thank you.